Get a little bit of information, a little background. I've told them a little bit about how you were an Army colonel, and you went to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and that you have been studying UFOs, remote viewing, near-death experiences, psychokinesis, and that you've actually met with shamans all over the world. I just find this absolutely amazing. So let's start with UFOs. That's one of the more popular things that we talk about here.
All right.
Tell me a little bit about your UFO experience.
Be a little more specific. I mean,
well, have you actually?
Well,
have you come in contact with aliens, or is it all through documentations and pictures that you've got?
Okay. First line of the book is UFOs are real. And I mean by that physical craft that some of them transit the universe, etc. The last paragraph goes basically, and whatever this is more complex than we ever imagined. So when you say, what are UFOs? I start with, what do you mean? And specifically, we've got everything from little balls of light to reports of hard craft a mile or more across, and everything in between. And it's that variability that's a huge problem.
I totally agree. I had read an article some time ago now, it's probably about maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago, about, where was this? I think it was in Greenland, where the snow had melted unnaturally quick. I feel like 30% of the snow melted in the span of less than a month. And in the process of doing that, exposed a huge UFO that they report is 200 miles long. What was it, 200 miles long? 20 miles, I can't remember, 50 miles wide? 50 miles wide and 2 miles high. This thing is absolutely a monstrosity. Have you heard of that?
I thought the probability of that being real approaching zero.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because of the size?
No. Just because of everything you're saying. It sounds like typical folklore or CT kinds of stuff.
Uh-huh.
CT is my shorthand for conspiracy theory, which is absolutely rampant in the field.
Hmm. So, as far as what you have seen and what you have experienced, with regard to, let's speak with the larger ones, the people commonly refer to flying saucers. And I know that's a great generalization within itself. But what experience have you had with those people that would be standing outside and look up and see these things that were large enough to be seen with the naked eye?
Well, I don't think that's relevant. Because the problem you have with personal observations, people see lots of things, and we even know that at least 95% of all sightings are just misidentification of something else.
Uh-huh.
But then you have a problem with hoaxes, etc., etc. What are far more interesting to me are the ones in which you have hard data, because we have sensor systems that pick these things up all the time. So.
They are picked up on radar, correct?
Well, radar is one. There's satellites pick them up. There's all kinds of photos. Of course, there's a huge problem now that we have digital photography, because almost anything can be faked. But some of the earlier photos and polarized are really quite interesting.
Now, in your experience, when you say photos, can you elaborate a little bit? What have you seen as far as photos that you believe are authentic? What have you seen?
Well, I think McMinnville set is one. The names in California, a set of the Van Heflin photos are pretty valid. There's quite a few out there. The problem is there's probably more fakes than real ones. Uh-huh.
So in your estimation, 95% of what we're seeing is a misidentification?
Well, that's not mine. That's a standard accepted
really?
figure. That's at least 95%.
Wow.
Misidentification of either things flying or astronomical phenomena, atmospheric configurations that cause it. So it's the vast majority.
What in all these things that you have, my goodness, myths, conspiracies, you've spoken to shamans, psychokinesis, near-death experiences. What started all? What peaked all this for you?
Interesting question, and I really don't know. I've been interested in various kinds of phenomena since I was a little kid, many years ago. And what I have found is the more involved you get, the more kinds of phenomena and evidence appears out there. Again, the problem is what I call signal to noise, and that is that there's so much BS that it's, you gotta have reliable sources and multiple ways of checking things in order to understand the reliability of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no doubt the reality of many of these phenomena. I'm just back from West Africa. We're in Togo and Benin, for instance, studying voodoo, and we watched people doing things with fire you simply can't do. I've done fire walking, and that is trivial compared to the kinds of things that we were observing. For instance, picking up burning logs and holding it in your mouth and flames shooting up, and not even singeing chin hair.
Wow.
Dominant. And I just don't know how you do that. Taking hot coals and holding them in their mouth, and as they're exhaling, you can see the coals getting brighter and staying there for more than a minute.
Wow.
When you watch people play with fire and axe and all that, you'll notice that it's very, very fast, and you get the flames to burn away from the mouth or skin or whatnot. And these guys just held it on there. They stood in it. They sat in it. They did things you just can't do. And
where was this at?
That was in Togo, in West Africa.
And I take it that this is like, were these some of the shamans that you met with that were doing this?
No, I don't know if they were voodoo priests. That's what they would call themselves. And definitely initiated. This is not something that's taken lightly, nor is it something that the general populace can do. You've got to go through extensive training courses and initiation before you're allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they trotted out a couple of kids, 10 or 11 years old, and the priest basically passed the power to them, and we watched them do some of that.
You said something.
Themselves very badly.
You said something that caught my interest. You said they passed the power to them. Is that correct?
Correct.
When they did this, did they perform a ritual, or did they just said, "Now it's yours"? And
they were out there holding the burning branches already, kind of touching them. And he went over and kind of tapped him on the head with his elbow.
Wow! Wow! That's amazing.
I have not. I've been looking on the internet. I have not found anything similar or anything that approaches, what I videotaped on this trip.
That blows my mind. Let's go to the other side now. We're talking about fire. What about water? I understand that you were one of the first people to explore the unique underwater artifacts that have become known as the Bimini Wall. And many believe this to be the remnants of Atlantis. Can you tell me anything about that?
That's really, really old stuff. So on the website, that goes back 60, about 1970, somewhere around there. There's certainly interesting artifacts. Some people believe that it is beach rock. I found it quite unique. If you look at the picture, even you have posted, that is quite consistent with what we saw. And the point was, when you swam over the ocean, it looked like ocean floor, and then you hit this long, long chain of rocks, about 1,800 meters, and just all of them laid almost perfectly, like perpendicularly or parallel, and very square, very large. And I say large, I got pictures swimming alongside it where it's certainly longer than a scuba diver. We were free diving, actually, but with fins and all that. So you're talking about at least 8 feet long and maybe as much wide, and very, very heavy. Certainly not things that would have been dropped there.
And dropped in a manner, I've seen pictures of this thing, dropped in a manner where it actually looks like a road.
Yeah, and like I said, the whole thing is about 1,800 meters, so it wasn't like some suggested it was ballast from a ship or something like that. They'd have to have things bigger than our aircraft carriers today to have that happen.
And they're all uniformly laid out as well. I mean, so if there were ballast from a ship, they would have had to literally gone out of their way to lay them in the manner that they've been laid down. Otherwise, it would have just been dropped haphazardly.
It would have to have been a very big ship.
Yeah. Well, do you think that this has anything to do with Atlantis? Any relation?
I don't know. I've been interested in pre-cataclysmic civilizations for a long time. There's some very interesting work that is just coming out of Brazil, because the out of Africa thesis puts man, what they call Clovis man, arriving in the U.S. around 12,000 years ago, and potentially further south. But they're coming up with human findings that are 30 to 40,000 years ago, so it precludes the entire out of Africa thesis.
Wow. I saw an article, I had actually reposted it up on my Facebook page, where some people were finding ancient artifacts here in North America, and the markings on the artifacts were very similar to the same markings that the Israelites used. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes. I mean, there are plenty of sightings. It's commonly accepted now that Norse probably made it, hundreds and hundreds of years before Columbus, and probably came in and actually started small colonies. But there are things that look like they predate that as well.
Wow.
You find the same thing, conundrum with Chinese types of things found off the west coast. So it looks like they had transoceanic sailing long before anybody thought that was possible.
Wow. Yeah, when I read that article, I was quite shocked, because what we were taught was it was the Indians and that was it. Come to find out that again we've been lied to. Should I be surprised? Well, let's.
I'm not sure it's lying. It's just incomplete data sets, and one of the problems we have, I think, with anthropology and archaeology is that they adopt a standard model and then do not want to hear any data that conflicts with the established theories. And that's certainly true on the Giza Plateau in Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely. Some big megaliths located around there.
Well, there's quite a bit of stuff, and probably more still buried than we have found. The thing about even they think that Luxor and Thebes were probably at one time a single city. The problem is the population of Egypt has gone up, and there's very little land for people to house, and so they've built houses directly over that. They're trying to prevent that now, but as we're getting better with the Earth-penetrating radars, we're just finding more and more sites. Same is true in Mesoamerica, because almost every little bump you see down there is probably a temple or some kind of ancient building, and they estimate we may have hit 5% of all the buried cities that are out there.
Wow. I've always been intrigued how, like in Israel, for example, there are places in Israel where they have built over complete cities. There's a city built over a complete city. And it's
that's a norm, yeah.
It's always intrigued me on, well, how do you do that? I mean, I heard New York is like, there's places in New York that are like that. In Colorado, I heard there's places that are like that, where they literally built a city on top of another city. Well, how in the world do you do that? That just blows my mind.
Well, it's called engineering, and the problem with many of these areas is very limited space where you would want to put a city. And there's infrastructure that goes in, so you're taking advantage of that, things like roads that are connecting between other cities and routes of transportation, trade, communication. So it makes it almost a logical place to build. But we have found, I mean, that's a norm throughout the ancient world, to find one city built on top of another. It also makes it extremely difficult to age, try to date many of the things, because you dig things up, and so just assuming that each layer is like sediment is not necessarily accurate.
Now, I see that you have studied so many things that really pique my interest as well. Let's talk a little bit about telekinesis. What kind of studying did you do on that?
Well, we used to teach what's called metal bending, colloquially called spoon bending, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's real? When I say that's real, and you say spoon bending, I'm thinking of, if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, where the child rubs the spoon with his thumb and bends the spoon. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. That really does happen.
Wow.
And has been going on. But, of course, many of the people will be familiar with Uri Geller.
Yeah.
And he's sort of a model. He's been a friend of mine for a number of decades. But what happened was an aerospace engineer from McDonnell Douglas by the name of Jack Houck observed Uri and what they were doing, and then he developed a process where you could teach the skills in a relatively short period of time, meaning an hour or two at the most, and took it forward and literally, taught thousands and thousands of people, and a number of us picked up the process, and so it has gone forth and multiplied in many areas.
Are you able to do this, John?
That's not relevant. I taught it to many people, and one of the things they would always ask, "Can you do it? Would you demonstrate?" And the answer is, "I won't." And the reason is, if I do it, you can come up with a lot of reasons how I might have tricked it.
Mm-hmm.
If, on the other hand, I have you do it, then you got to explain how you tricked yourself.
Well, the reason I'm asking if you have done this is to know if you have actually experienced this firsthand in your life.
I taught it. I mean, I was one of the guys teaching it to hundreds of people, including fairly senior officers in the military.
Wow. Can you go into it a little bit with me? What it involves?
What's involved is a pretty straightforward process. It's written up. I think Jack's got it on his website. Unfortunately, Jack died earlier this year. Side note, I had the worst case of diabetes I've ever seen, and anybody who either has diabetes or leaning that way, you should really take care of it. But process is basically to start with from a belief system that says maybe this can happen, and we show them, how to do it, talk them through kind of a mental process of creating the energy in a vacuum, if you will, and then bringing it down, putting it into the spoon or fork or whatever you're using, and giving it the intention, and you hear them yell, bend, bend, bend. And then we start with kindergarten, meaning that people are allowed to use two hands, and what they report is they feel a change, such as it's heated or cooled or like plastic, or some of the things they say. And then it becomes soft and malleable for a brief period of time, and you can take it and just twist them up. Interesting, but hardly proof positive. The ones that are dramatic are when we get into the graduate session, and then that usually happens about an hour or so into it. And there you hold the implements by the base only. You are not allowed to touch it. And contrary to popular belief, we really did have magicians working with us, so I know most of the tricks that are involved. And anytime you see somebody put their fingers around the neck of the spoon, forget it. They're probably faking it. But anyway, with the people holding it, and with forks, the tines tend to bend, and I must say, this only happens sometimes. Okay? This is not like 100% anything approaching that. But then, we've had them just drop over a full 90 degrees with absolutely no physical force applied.
Can you, in your opinion, can you lend any theory or information as to how that is happening? I mean, let me share with you this before you answer, so you maybe you can see where I'm coming from. My belief system is that we are very powerful beings. In and of ourselves, we're extremely powerful beings. It's just that we're ignorant of that fact, I guess is the easiest way for me to explain it. I know that through my research, we can literally change the world around us simply by the thoughts that are in our head. So I'm wondering if this is in correlation with what you're teaching. Is anything that I've just said relate to the way that you taught what you taught about this process?
Well, quite possibly. Because we don't think it's energy transference. I mean, one of the questions that always comes up is, where did the energy come from that allowed the thing to take place? One of the theories that we had by one of the leading engineers out of Princeton, in fact, he was the head of the dean of the School of Engineering, suggested that what you're working at is an information level, meaning that there is information that tells the fork to be a fork. It's put in when it's stamped. And that if you change that information, that would allow it to potentially bend. One of the big problems we have always is this catch-22, and I've been through this with actually the National Academy of Sciences. And they go, well, you don't have a good explanation for it. And a friend of mine points out, anything that does happen can happen. So the white crows flew, the stuff bent. It's now up to us to try to come up with a better explanation of how that might work.
Mm-hmm. Well, are you familiar with Dr. Masaru Emoto?
I'm not sure.
Dr. Emoto, this is part of the basis of my belief regarding our thoughts and the ability of our thoughts to literally change physical things around us. Dr. Emoto took water and took the same 2 containers of water, same water from the same source, put them in 2 different containers, wrote "I love you" on one, wrote "I hate you" on the other, and every day he would love one without saying anything, and the other one he would curse in his mind, "I hate you, you fool, blah, blah." He then froze this water, and as the water began to freeze and formed crystals, the pictures that he took...
I'm familiar with most of that.
Okay, that's where I'm basing, that's where I'm coming from.
There are real problems with the research, and that is, how do you separate thought? I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Bankston, but the work that he's done, basically with healing rats and things like that, using the issue is having control samples and keeping the control separated. When you know it exists, may be enough to influence the outcome. Gets into the super psi hypothesis as this would, and so yeah, I have seen many of those things. Not quite sure what to make with it, but this gets back to my original statements on UFOs, because I think it applies here. Whatever it is, it's more complex than we ever imagined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. There are some things out there. I mean, this subject that we're discussing right now, it completely blows my mind. I know that without question that it is possible. I have friends of mine who are in the quantum scientists. They can derive electricity literally from thin air. So I know that the energy is there. Einstein called it the ether. This energy exists all through the universe. It is equal everywhere and in all places. It is endless and abundant. How to tap into it is the trick. I believe that possibly what you're describing, somehow your body is acting as a conductor for this energy and deriving this energy and focusing it, and the end result is what you see. Just a possible theory.
I am convinced that we're not at the point of asking the right questions yet, much less deriving the answers.
Uh-huh.
I do have an agenda that I push constantly, and that is what we need to do is to make it permissible for the best and the brightest to get involved in these sorts of studies, without risking their reputations and career. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, this Hummer is a tar baby, and I can show you some of the scars.
Oh, yeah. Now I see it's Ph.D. What are you? You're a doctorate, or doctor? What is the degree in?
Behavioral science. Did a lot of work in thanatology. My dissertation, I don't know if you know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but she was the head of my committee.
Wow.
And had to do with measuring the changes in spirituality in people who attended her life, death, and transition workshop. And
you've done some work, or you've researched in near death as well?
Yeah, at one point I was the president of the International Association of Near Death Studies. It was out of the University of Connecticut at that time.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about that. Sounds very, very interesting. Tell me a little bit about that. Did you have a lot of stories of the, what do they call it, the tunnel of light?
Well, I don't know where to start with that. Very fun. First of all, it happens, and it happens a lot. Most of the stories, again, are anecdotal, so you don't know if the person was actually close to death or not at the instant, because these are accidents, illness, and whatnot. The cases that I am personally interested in are ones in which one of two things happened. One, there was an information transference that cannot be explained by any traditional means. In other words, they couldn't possibly know the kinds of things that they come to know, or that you have spontaneous healing that takes place. and there are a number of those cases. There are some recent books out, one, Proof of Heaven, by Evan Alexander, who is not a relative of any kind that I know of. But what was so unique about it is the guy's a neurosurgeon and went into a coma for a week, should not have survived, but did, and tells just an absolute phenomenal tale of people and beings that he met during his sojourn.
Wow.
Another friend of mine is Ray Moody, and Raymond has done some work on one's reunions, and that's where people have interaction with departed ones, up to and including full visitations. A lot of it's just a sensing of somebody around, but others, where they walk into the room, which is kind of exciting. And the other is where you've had death experiences where multiple witnesses have been present and actually see the transformations take place, and beings arriving, and the departure of the soul, and things of that nature. But and being able to independently verify, what happened in these events.
Uh-huh. You've actually had people that have seen beings come,
Right.
Wow, I've not heard of that before. That's the first.
Well, there's something called widow's vision, which, and that was, in the old days, women used to outlive men normally, and they said about a third of the widows actually experienced something. And again, that something was just a sensing somebody's around helping you. You could say wishful thinking, okay, we'll do that. Up to where you've had the cases of them, physically appearing for short periods of time.
That's amazing. All right, we're up on a break. We're going to take a quick break here. A little bit about remote viewing. Can we go there a little bit?
Well, where do you want to start?
First of all, for those who are not familiar, what is remote viewing?
Well, remote viewing is acquiring information at a distance using just your mind. From a military perspective, we can think of it as psychic spying. Now, a lot of people question whether or not that you have, again, the theoretical explanation for it. What I like to tell folks is, well, you're worried about that. We used to have an operational capability that worked quite well. And again, we're dealing with the bad old days, working primarily against the Soviets, and understanding, what they were doing in the past. A lot of it was driven by work that they were doing, because there's no doubt that they were pursuing it quite effectively. But we had a training process whereby you could teach people to, again, use their mind to go out and access information and bring it back, and to do it in a method that provided usable information. I like to say sometimes it works. I might put out a cautionary note, because it's also, since the whole program was declassified, there's an awful lot of folks out there, and sort of caveat emptor, because I don't know how many people have claimed to have been in the program and know what they're doing, et cetera, and
it's easy to do.
Group, everybody knows each other. So a lot of smoke out there.
Have you had personal experience in remote viewing? I mean, in the sense that, have you personally experienced remote viewing?
Well, I took a bit of training. I'm not what you'd call a remote viewer, but underwent some of the training with some of the people. And There is a huge debate, by the way, that the guys who were the best of the best, and Ingo Swann was one, and Joe McMonagle, who was Remote Viewer 001, these folks were all what we call naturals. In other words, they just had innate ability to do that.
Uh-huh.
And the question that arises is whether or not it's a trainable skill. Many people believe that it is, and that's where these schools are being set up to teach people to do it. And some of them have had pretty good success.
Do you... I'm trying to figure out how to word this so I don't sound like a smarty pants. Do you believe that there's information available to us at any given time through what I would refer to as the spiritual realm?
Yes.
Is it possible that through this communication between us and the spiritual realm, we're able to derive this information?
Well, I'm not sure what you're describing as spiritual. That happens to be a term that I would use. I might mention when I did my dissertation, for instance, Elizabeth made me change one word, and I had used religiousness, and she says, no, you must use spiritual, because people definitely distinguish between the two.
Uh-huh.
And spiritual, in my colloquium, is kind of a much broader term. I've seen some very interesting data derived. I've also worked with mediums and people who channel information. And it's kind of like the remote viewers. Sometimes they get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do, it's certainly beyond, simple chance as somebody guessing. And,
No, I totally agree with you. The reason why I'm bringing this up is I personally have had this experience. It hasn't been on a regular basis, but I've had experiences many times when I'm having a conversation with somebody, and something will come to mind, and I'll ask them, and they'll go, "How did you know that?" I don't know. I'm this information's coming to me. In what I term the spiritual realm, is coming from outside of my body. And my mind is somehow tuned into it, I believe, through my own spirit. I believe that we're...
Part of the issue is the whole mind-body, brain-mind conundrum, if you will.
Uh-huh.
Because many of us believe that they're not synonymous now. In medical science in general, they would say that, the mind is part of the brain, but there's a whole host of studies on non-local phenomena which describes what you're suggesting, and that is that the mind does periodically tap into other things, and that with training you can certainly become better at doing that. Having said that, you run into the paradox of free will versus predestination. Most will suggest that free will exists. Thus, what you have when you're dealing with the future are possible futures.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can actually change. That would explain why sometimes predictions get it right and sometimes they get it wrong.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I totally agree. Because of the variable, of the free will variable, absolutely. But I have personally experienced it, and that's why I was asking, if it were to me, when I say spiritual, I'm saying and maybe I may be completely wrong here, but this is how I see it in my mind. I see that there's information that is available to the right person, and that information is kind of sort of like, if I see it almost like a radio, like a transmitter and a receiver kind of thing. So if your mind
that's a good analogy.
If your mind is tuned in the right vibration to that, then you can pick up bits and pieces of that, depending upon how well tuned you are into. That's what I call the spiritual information.
Yeah. I think that's probably a pretty good definition and pretty close to the way things work. We do know that a lot of psychic phenomena seems to be associated with activity on the right temporal lobe. Now, people from a mechanical standpoint want to say whatever is going on is generated there, as opposed to, no, the mind is mediating and just has the ability to access information and bring it in, again, under the right circumstances.
Have you had any experience with the pineal gland or the pineal gland?
Well, that is one of the proposed, they have thought that gland is directly related to psi phenomena.
Mm-hmm. This is why I'm asking, because I've done, when I spent 4 years in the Air Force, my official title was item research specialist. They taught me how to research very well. I was the guy that they would come to, and they would give me, if it were a priority one, I had 45 minutes on figure out how to get a part for a jet and get that jet back up in the air. So they taught me how to research quickly and research thoroughly. And I did a lot of research on the pineal gland, and it seems to be that if you could relate it to, if there is such a thing, it would be the gateway or the door, the opening into that realm, due to what this gland secretes when it's active.
Well, we're learning fMRIs are emerging. We used to use EEGs, or electroencephalograms, to study the brain, but now fMRI means the functional magnetic resonance imaging, and with that you can get down to millimeter accuracy, as opposed to what was available with the EEG work before. And we're learning a lot about what's going on, and there are a few people that are actually looking at things like psi phenomena and how the brain is functioning at the time that it's acquiring information, sending information, involved in these things. The biggest issue, this gets back to my mantra on getting the best and brightest involved, and along with that goes things like funding, because actually the funding in phenomena across the board is just minuscule, and particularly in times like we have now, where the economy is down, your availability to research is, or get funding for research is dramatically decreased. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a mistake, because it does go back to influencing the potential for everything.
Yep. I agree. The people who listen to me will hear me say many times, imagine what the world would be like if we took all the money that we spent on learning how to kill people and spent it on technology that would learn how to help people get along with each other. Imagine what kind of world that would be.
Good luck.
You can always dream, right? You can always have a dream.
The problem is we have a fear-based society.
Yeah.
And everything we do is based on terribly dysfunctional, but it's the one we have.
Now, you had said earlier your doctorate was in social behavior?
Well, behavioral science in general had a lot of hit many areas. The end was in thanatology, death and dying. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one who brought hospice to the United States, and so the work did parallel, because she also started having very unusual experiences, and she and Raymond Moody were the first ones to open MDs to come out and openly talk about near-death experience. But some of hers, I'll give you one of the cases, and it's one known as Mary Schwartz. Elizabeth was teaching at University of Chicago in the medical school, and had been talking about death and dying. She did something really unique in that aspect, and that is she brought dying patients in and had them talk to the doctors. They were doctors in training, medical students, advanced medical students, and tell them what their issues were. And of course, one of the big ones was nobody listens to us. But anyway, she had done that for a while and thought that it was getting a little old, so she has made up. She was working with a chaplain, and she decides that no, she's going to move on to something else. And she goes out, and standing in the hall is this woman.
Dr. Alexander, back on the line with me again. We're going to pick up where we left off. He was describing a situation where this lady had come in and escorted his friend, this lady that he knew, into her office, and he was about to tell us what she was going to say, and the line went dead. Dr. Alexander, back to you, sir.
Okay, well, just so the folks know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one who wrote On Death and Dying. She's the one who described, the 5 stages of dying and all of this. So she was world-renowned, even by this time. So she looks at, Elizabeth looks at the woman and says to herself, I know who this is. This is a patient of mine who died 2 years ago. And so the conversation goes on. You're not supposed to stop. You need to continue, et cetera, et cetera. So she asks the woman and says, well, this chaplain is not here. Would you send a note to him? Could you write a note for him, thinking, I want to get some physical evidence? And sure enough, she writes the note, and then it signs it Mary Schwartz. And they went and, of course, had the note analyzed, and handwriting said it was Mary Schwartz, who had died 2 years ago.
My goodness.
So this gets back to the ones we were talking about, physically walking in.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And this was over 2 years later?
Yeah.
And I'm sure she was probably shaking in her pants at that point. How long did this person stay around?
I'm not sure. It was a matter of several minutes, though.
That's amazing.
Well, and see, one of the problems, and this is one of the things I preach, is the difference in societies. Because in the Western society, we take all of these things as being really strange and unusual. There are other societies in the world, even with folks who are highly educated, in which these things are much more normal than the way we would treat them.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, throw out a name. Have you ever heard of Chico Javier?
No.
Okay, probably wouldn't. The guy was known in Brazil. Had actually a horrible lifetime and all that, but turned out to be a phenomenal medium. He wrote over 100 books, and they were all channeled information from a host of, many of them well-known authors and things of that nature. He never took credit for it. He always said, this is the original author, and they took them in and had the material validated that the style was the same as the original author who had channeled it. The handwriting, in many cases, was, sign was completely correct and validated as that individual. And he had many, many instances. And he also had a TV program in real. And the movie that I saw on his life that was so interesting is they have a dramatic representation of incidents that had happened in his life, and then at the end they started playing video of him on television, the real guy, and they say, just nailed that. And again, I happen to deal in Brazil at some very high levels, and the difference there is when you talk to the intelligentsia, they have no problems with these kinds of phenomena. It's like, oh yeah, it absolutely happens. Another one we might discuss, do you know John of God?
I've heard GOBBS.
Did you what?
Say the last name again.
No, it's just known as John of God.
Oh, I thought you were saying somebody's name. No.
That's what he goes by, is John of God.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
And he's in Aberdeen, Brazil, treats many, many people. We've been there and seen him, and came away totally impressed. There's a story that's now told on PBS by, do you know Wayne Dyer?
I've heard the name, yes.
Okay, Dyer was a great motivational speaker, extremely well known in the U.S. and around the world. But anyway, he came down with leukemia and was going to go down to Brazil. He decided not to go. His wife decides to go. And so they're going to do remote psychic surgery. And he's living in Kauai, and so they told him, okay, here's what you do. We're going to do surgery. You need to dress in white, drink a lot of water, lie down, and do not move for 24 hours. And so the time comes and goes, and the psychic surgery occurs. And so he says, hey, I feel better when I walk. I like to walk here. Of course, the landscape in Kauai would entice that. And he got up and made it a few hundred feet before he collapsed, just as if he had had real surgery. More importantly, leukemia was in remission.
Wow.
Now, I talked to, when I was down there, stopped at the Amazonian Hotel. Give you a feel for it. The cost was $25 a day, including 3 meals.
Wow.
A few years ago. But the woman who ran the place had come to see John, and 12 years ago she had been given less than 3 months to live.
Wow. Wow. And what does he call himself?
Well, John of God. You can Google John of God.
John of God. Is that right? John of God.
Pop up. There's the websites there. He rarely travels, but he has been in the U.S. I know doctors that have been in studying him. They've done longitudinal studies. There's been, any number of cases that have been documented in which cures have come. That said, to be honest, there of course are some in which the healing did not have an effect. And
well, are you familiar with Greg Braden?
is he what?
Are you familiar with Greg Braden?
No.
He's a teacher as well, and I found a video that he had posted in China. I believe it is in China. There's a medicineless hospital in China where they perform surgery as what you're talking about, and it happens instantaneously. And in this particular video, this lady has a tumor, I believe it was in her bladder. It was inoperable and spreading at a very quick rate. And she was living here in the United States, and she had heard of this in China, went over there, and there were 3 men at the head of the bed that she was laying on, and they prayed over her and chanted over her, and they were taking a sonogram of her while this was occurring, and you could literally see this tumor disintegrate as they continued to chant, and the entire process was approximately, from beginning to end, was less than 5 minutes. So I know what you're talking about is absolutely true.
Yeah, strange things do happen, but they don't always happen. And I think that you have to, if you understand, it gets back to the spiritual nature of things, that sometimes the answer is no.
I think a lot of it falls on the belief system as well. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying that one of the big problems for us in the West is that we look at these things as unusual and strange, whereas in other societies in the world, they're quite a norm. I've been in China. I've seen the Qigong and hospitals, and where they use these alternative methods, and kung fu schools, and I've been involved in the martial arts long enough to have seen some pretty unusual things there. In Aikido, for instance, had met Tohei, who was one of the 2 disciples of Ueshiba, who developed the system, and just seen him do things, again, knock people over and no touching. I mean, projecting energy with enough force to really knock people around.
I don't know if it's the same gentleman, but is he the one who's able to take newspaper, put his hand over it, and catch the paper on fire? Is that the guy?
I don't know if that's the one. I have seen that done, but the ones I saw were in Bali. I think,
again, I believe that we're very, very powerful beings. We're just ignorant of what is available to us.
Well, the problem is more that you need to develop the skills.
Mm-hmm.
My position is like the remote viewing we started talking about, is that everybody has some capability, but as much as I train, I'm never going to break a 4-minute mile. Mm-hmm. And I understand that, but I can improve. Mm-hmm. And I think just like you can make physical improvement and mental improvement, you can also learn to control and project these energy forms.
I totally agree. This information, as I had shared with you earlier, where there are times I get what I call psychic information. I tell people, anybody, I really believe this, anybody's capable of this. It's, if you want to learn how to play the piano, then you have to go through the rigors of learning how to play the piano. You have to, whatever's required to play that instrument, you need to learn how to go through that in order to be able to play the piano. If you want to be able to do this, what I call psychic ability and communication, you have to practice. For me, it's about prayer. It's about a lot of meditation, a lot of quiet time, listening to what's going on in my head. People might think I'm crazy when I say there are voices that go on in my head. Always the voice sounds like it's me, but sometimes these voices say things I know are not of me. They didn't originate from me, especially when I'm talking with someone who I really don't know a whole lot about personally, and I say something to them like, "Why did your brother commit suicide?" And they just look at me like, "How did you know that?" And I know that I say to them, "Well, he used a rope to commit suicide. He hung himself." And they'll look at me and go, "Well, how would you possibly know that?" I don't know that. That's my point. How would I possibly? There is no possible way. That information is coming to me from somewhere, and it's those voices that during my quiet time, that I learned to differentiate, I guess is a proper way of saying, differentiate the voices that are going on inside my head. I know that all sounds crazy, but this is what happens to me.
Actually, I've written several books, but mine are all nonfiction. But I do know of fiction writers, and when I've dabbled with it, they say basically the books are narrated.
Interesting. Wow. So can we talk about, how much longer have you got, Doctor? You still there?
Yeah.
Okay. How much more time have you got with me?
I understood we were supposed to go to the bottom of the hour.
Okay, good. Well, we're at 11, we're at the top of the hour, so we should be fine. Can we talk a little bit about shamans?
A little bit about shamans.
I understand.
We have just returned. In July, we spent 3 weeks in northern Mongolia, right up on the border with the reindeer shaman. And then in August, we spent another 3 weeks with the voodoo priests in Togo and Benin. Mm-hmm. So,
well, we spoke a little bit about the voodoo
shaman all over the world. So, do you have a more specific question?
Well, we spoke a little bit about the voodoo that you met with. What about the other one that you had mentioned earlier? You saw one where?
Well, the others were in Mongolia.
Mongolia.
Yeah,
okay.
Northern Mongolia. There's a movie that has attracted a lot of attention called The Horse Boy, and it has to do with an American boy who was autistic, and they took him over and had him meet with a number of the shamans. And I have posted, by the way, on my website, I have, and I know you've got links to it on from yours, but if you go to the bottom of the first page, there are many, many pages of pictures that we took. This is a truly remote area in that we flew from Ulaanbaatar to Maroon and then drove from there as long as you could drive. And this is remote enough that we did not see a gravel road for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then when it got to where the vehicles couldn't go anymore, we brought in horses and pack animals and rode 100 miles on horseback, going into, literally up and over glaciers and whatnot, down to where these nomads live, because they have domesticated reindeer. There are reindeer in other places in the world, but they're not domesticated like this. And they have shamans, and of course, being that remote, the shamans are absolutely key to the way they live. I mean, traditional medicine is just rarely available. I did interviews with them. They do lots of drumming, and we had some remarkable incidents occur. But they're heavily into reincarnation and the spiritual nature of that. Mm-hmm. Even to the point where if somebody's pregnant, they go in and say, okay, what spirit is returning? Mm-hmm. And so they can prepare based on the prior life, what are the things they're going to need in the next one, the one that's about to occur.
Now, you have touched on something that I am extremely interested in, and that is reincarnation. When they go in and they find out what spirit is coming back, when this child is born, does the child remember its previous life? Do you know?
I don't think there's any difference there in what we see in ours, the veil of forgetfulness and whatnot. And it seems that part of the mission is figuring out what the mission is. Instead of making it easy, saying, go do A, B, C, and D. Uh-huh. It would certainly make life a lot easier.
Absolutely. I can't think of this young boy's name, but I think he's about 11 years old. They did a video about him. As he was growing up, he kept telling his mom, he kept drawing pictures of war and aircraft fighting each other and aircraft crashing. And as he got old enough to speak, he was describing an incident where he kept telling his mom it was him inside of an aircraft. He was trapped inside of an aircraft, and he ended up dying in the aircraft. And when he got old enough, they decided to check the story out. He was on some ship. They went and found a couple of living crew that was still alive. He mentioned their name. He knew them right off the bat as soon as he saw them, called them by name. It was amazing. The whole story is amazing.
There's a number of those. There's actually a series, I think, on the Biography Channel called, was it The Spirit Inside My Child or something like that. And it is The Ghost Inside My Child. And it is a series of cases like that. They all feature relatively young children, and then they usually all end with meeting the real person themselves and describing incidents that, again, they would not traditionally have known or anything.
I absolutely believe that's happening. Reincarnation is happening. There's just too much evidence that I have seen that points to it. Over here, we don't believe in that. We think that's blasphemy, but that's what I believe. I believe that we do come back.
Because remember, reincarnation was taught in Christianity during the early years. It was actually voted out in some of the big meetings that were held. So priests had decided that reincarnation was not a good thing because it let people exert control over their own actions. Uh-huh. and it lost. The priests were losing control, so
they didn't like that.
Yeah, make it go away.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I would like to. You had mentioned earlier on in our conversation about a fear-based society, and that another area that piqued my interest because it to me on the surface right now, at least on the surface, we are being inundated with a fear-based administration. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not sure. I hate to get into political aspects because I think this kind of goes across the board, but I don't think it's unique here because, I mean, if you just take and look at things like advertising, I mean, everything in advertising seems to be based on creating fear, and if you don't do this, bad things are going to happen, and your life will never be the same again.
You mentioned advertising. I have to ask you this because of your background in with your doctorate. How does somebody like Apple, for example, this has always mesmerized me. How does somebody like Apple create demand for a product that hasn't even come to market yet, and then when people have been informed that it is coming to market, that it's going to be to market within a span of hours, they're literally, I laugh because it's so silly to me, they're literally standing in line waiting for this product, sometimes upwards of 24 hours.
Yeah.
Do you think that is, they're using, it's my personal opinion that they are, do you think that they're using some form of mental, manipulation?
No. Unfortunately, I don't think it's, other than if you're talking about some unique form of mental manipulation, I don't see that at all. I do think that they understand how to create, desire for certain things and things that you don't need. Unfortunately, we're seeing this happen in the third world as they're starting to develop, and we are telling people you must have this. And I'll use the classic example, new sneakers. I mean, people get killed literally over new sneakers coming out. Got to have this, and it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. I can't. You in your description
of the materialistic world, if you will.
Well, in your description, you said they were able to create a demand for their product, and that word "create" to me is they brainwash these people. They're playing with these people's mind. Of course, some of these people they're a couple of flies short of a Happy Meal anyway, but that's beside the point. I really believe that somehow they're able to mentally manipulate people, into certain people, not everybody, but certain people.
I don't think it's mystical. I think they just are very good at what they do.
It amazes me. It amazes me. This last go-around when this iPhone came out, there were people fighting in line to get a phone, for Pete's sake, to get a piece of electronic equipment that is, oh my gosh. And some of them were camping, waiting for this thing to come out, camping outside. It's just crazy.
It is. Literally, but that doesn't matter.
Wow, that's amazing. In your studies that you have done, now I understand you were in the Army and you were a colonel, right?
Right.
And is any of that time that you spent in the Army, I know some of it you said was remote viewing was during the Army as well?
Your signal is fading again. So.
I apologize. While you were in the Army, was remote viewing part of your job, your duty? Or was all that afterwards?
No, I did not specifically do remote viewing, but I was involved with similar projects as part of our,
Because I know that at one
job,
I know that at one time the government, through some of the documentaries I watched, the government was spending quite a bit of money on remote viewing. They had invested quite a bit of it.
Yeah, but the figure you hear is $20 million.
Uh-huh.
You understand, you talk $20 million over 20 years, you're not talking lunch money.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot when it's like a big problem we have with many of the phenomena. When you put it all together and look at it as an aggregate, as a pile, it sounds like a lot. When you separate it out and disperse it over a long period of time, not so much.
So what they did is they took the big lump sum so it would be more sensational, I guess.
Oh yeah,
and use it.
And nobody knows what the exact amount was. 20 million is probably low, but I mean, when you talk about programs in hundreds of millions per year, a million a year, it's literally below most visibility threshold.
Hmm. Wow.
It's a lot, and if we're going into our bank account, that would be a lot of money.
Yeah.
But by government standards,
it's not even a drop in the bucket.
Unfortunately, they don't pay very close attention.
Now when we have, what was that last one I heard, $100,000 for an outhouse. No, I don't think they're paying very close attention at all. I think it's going right by them. All right, you still with me?
I am.
All right, that's good.
I didn't know how I'm supposed to respond to that. Yeah, okay.
I won't get you involved in the political side. We do quite a bit of political, I guess, political opinions is the best way to put it here, because we're very outspoken about what's going on. I just don't believe what's going on was intended for us by the people who formed our country, and what's happening is happening because people are remaining silent, and that's one of my passions, is to let people know that it isn't as you've been told it is.
I think that any politician who says, I trust in the wisdom of the American people, knows that he's lying, and it's insane to believe that.
Especially with, absolutely, especially with the way that they distribute the information, because everything that people think they know is not. It's just not that way. It's it's a whole other story altogether. I see that you formed an aerial. What was that? You formed a group to study aerial phenomena?
Well, that was the UFOs.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the theoretical physics group. Yeah, I put together. That's the whole thesis of the most recent book. But I had all the services, the intelligence community, the senior people from the aerospace industry, and we got together at the super high classified levels and looked at it, and I take a lot of heat because I come out, I actually give talks and say I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is the government's been telling you the truth. The bad news is the government's been telling you the truth. They really don't care. And that's very hard for people to believe. But that is, in fact, the way it's... and it's not to say events don't happen. They do, but they're pretty rare. And unfortunately, I like to say Condon was right, and what's known as the Condon Report, or the Colorado Report, in that the question to him was not, are UFOs real? The question was, is this a threat? And his answer was, no threat. And the Air Force said, that's what we want to hear. We do threat, so not our job, man.
So, in your opinion, do you feel that they are a threat or they are not a threat?
Oh, well, I'd say Condon's right. It's been almost 50 years, there hasn't been an invasion, so I guess you'd have to say no threat.
I seem to feel that there are no threat because I think it's been spanning a lot longer than just 50 years.
Jacques Vallée did a recent book on that, and he points out that the study of the incidents go back for millennia.
Yeah. I have seen where people have taken pictures of the inside of the pyramids, and there are pictures of helicopters, there are pictures of submarines, there were pictures of a jet. This has been going on for a long time, a very long time. I think as we have evolved, they have evolved as well. And as time has progressed, their evolution is far greater, far faster than ours. But I'm
going to have to disagree. I think that what we're looking at it gets back to what we were discussing earlier, mental phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
That we're involved in creating it, and that includes UFO phenomena as well. And that the mental aspects are there and always have been.
I don't understand. You feel that we're actually creating the phenomena?
Probably.
Through our belief system?
I'll give you a specific example that I think is pretty good, and one that Jacques had in one of his earlier books, and it describes a guy who is driving in the state of Washington around the turn of the last century, in other words, the 20th century, and he said he drove around the hill, and there was a UFO hovering there, and he said it was clear and he could see every rivet in it. And you go, that's kind of interesting, because less than 50 years later, we know that you would never use rivets.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't stand up for interstellar travel. So what you tend to get are reports of devices that are a little bit ahead of where we are, but not a huge leap ahead of where we are. So when they say it's 1,000 years in advance, the reality is, no, that's not true. That it's slightly ahead, but not beyond our ability to conceptualize it.
Good point. Interesting.
Well, if you go back to the late 1800s, the 19th century, you had reports then of airships that were floating around, and pretty widely reported. And we now know that is certainly, that would have been very advanced at that time, but certainly not equal to where we are today. And you've had many reports. Betty and Barney Hill, one of the famous abduction cases that took place.
Yep.
And she talked about having a medical examination in which they poked something in her stomach. And everybody said, oh, that's really strange. Why would you do an experiment there? Well, what you know now is that lithoscopy came along, and within just less than a couple of decades, that's exactly how we would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But not 1,000 years in advance.
Yeah, I see your point. Absolutely. Yeah, I read a lot about them many years ago. It was amazing what had happened to them, and ironically, I have a personal friend of mine who shared a very, very similar circumstance, driving in Florida, and ended up with a case of missing time and space, missing about 200 miles on a trip that they took in about 4 hours of time. And when he told me about it, his whole demeanor changed. I mean, I can't tell you that it really happened to him, but I can tell you that what he was telling me, he 100% believes it. 100%. There's no question in my mind. He believes what he's saying. His whole, the color of his skin would change, and his face would, you could just tell that this person was completely overcome by what they were telling. It was amazing. It was amazing.
It is.
And I think this continues to happen. Have you had any experience with these cattle mutilations?
Oh, yeah, when we had the ranch, I was one of the first people to stay up at Skinwalker Ranch. And so we studied cattle mutilation. The most dramatic case that occurred was where the rancher went out. It was calving season, 10 o'clock in the morning-ish, bright sunny day. The area is flat and level. You can see for a considerable distance. And anyway, he goes out and he finds a newborn calf. So what they do is they tag it and they weigh it, so it's now associated with the mother. Then he moved across the field a few 100 meters to another calf, and he tags it and weighs it, and he comes back and calf one is dead. Not only is it dead, it has been mutilated, as you're suggesting, it has been exsanguinated. There's about 20 pounds of stuff missing from it. And how you do that in broad daylight in an area where they shoot rustlers, they don't take kindly to that. Pretty amazing, but absolutely happened. There's no doubt about that.
Can you lend any opinion on what you think is happening out there? Any idea?
Where now?
Regarding these cattle mutilations, specifically
no. But most of the explanations just don't make any sense to me. Especially the ones where they say the government did it and all of that, because that makes zero sense when you could just buy the cattle and not cause a ruckus or anything.
Oh yeah, they got a lot more going on in secret than that.
It's a lot easier. No, this is why you get, again, my mantra says, whatever it is far more complex than we ever imagined. And
I have come to
address it, and this is why I keep saying, need to get best and brightest involved, and got to be accepting A, it happens, and B, we ought to be studying it.
Well, I've come across different articles that seem to relate to genetics, something to do with genetics. They feel that it's a genetic alteration of some sort.
I've seen most of them, and to me, that's total nonsense.
Now,
if E.T. knows how to get here across a gazillion miles and that, he certainly understands physics. If they understand physics, he probably understands biology. So, people like to say, well, they need our genes to repopulate and all that sort of nonsense.
Yeah, that is some of the things that I've heard and read, yes.
Yeah, well, my point would be, I don't need humans. I've done some interesting slides on this and say, why would you do that? Why would they put up with humans to begin with? Just depopulate the world, and you're not going to fight mano a mano, as Hollywood would have us believe, but just use biological warfare, wipe out the world, and reconstitute it. All they would need is about 10 bodies, and they certainly understand how to do cloning at a more advanced rate than we would, and you can, generate the population you want that's not nearly as cantankerous as pesky humans would be.
Do you think that the Great Flood could have possibly been that exactly, that the pool had become so corrupted that it was time to wipe it clean, so to speak?
That would be violating the first directive, the prime directive. You don't screw with an emerging civilization.
Uh-huh. And you, so you don't...
Pretty well on Star Trek, anyway.
So you don't feel that would have been the case then?
I don't know.
Well, you never know. On this show, we talk about... Did you ever have the opportunity to watch the movie The Matrix?
Yes.
And in The Matrix where... now my mind is going to go nuts on me. I can't think of his name. He's talking to the star, and he's saying, you got the choice, so I'm going to play it for you. So we play the reality of the truth, and if you take the blue pill or the green pill, whatever it was, you go back to sleep, and then you wake up to the reality that you're living, which is an absolute fake. And how many times have I come across similar circumstances in my life where that movie just replicates it almost to the T, how we are living literally in a matrix. So many things around us are an illusion, yet they are reality. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see it.
Well, Plato addressed that, I think. The allegory of the cave.
Mm-hmm. Well, Doc, if we're about at the bottom of the hour. I'm going to cut out a little short tonight. Would you like to any parting thoughts? You want to leave us with the websites? I know you wrote a book. You want a little bit about the book? Let's tell the people about the book as well.
Well, the book is UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Reality. It has a lot to do with exactly what we're talking about. Because I do tell people, if you're going to play in the UFO arena, you better understand conspiracy theory, because you're part of it. Either you believe there's a cover-up, or if you don't, you're part of the cover-up.
This is true.
Catch-22, yeah. And but I said, I think UFOs are absolutely real, and I list in there a lot of cases that, the ones that I think are absolutely valid and have high degree of credibility and evidence to support them.
While I'm thinking about it, Dr. Alexander, are you familiar with, oh my goodness, Meyer.
Billy Meyer.
Billy Meyer, yes. Are you familiar with Billy Meyer?
Yeah.
And what is your opinion on, and I know this is just your opinion, but do you think this is for real? Do you think it was a setup?
Isn't it wonderful? I don't know if you are aware or keep up with this, but he is now more spiritually elevated than Jesus Christ.
Oh my goodness.
And, if that isn't a warning flag, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Well, with regard to the documentation that he had, I thought that supposedly during the time that he did all that, it would be extremely difficult to fake it, so to speak. And if he did a phenomenal job.
He did. There was some, and the other piece of that, of course, was that he had lost his arm in an industrial accident fairly young. So, the question was, how does a one-armed man do all of those sorts of things?
Mm-hmm.
I have more problem now with the people that are around him, because he's very insulated, and they come out with these what I think are preposterous statements, and they keep swearing a lot of this is coming true, and I'm still holding my breath. It's like the folks who say that E.T. is here to help humanity, and I argue that, well, if E.T. is here, he rode in with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because it's certainly not for our benefit.
I would I would agree with you.
And poverty is increasing, illness. Haven't seen climate changes that are taking place. Don't see a lot of things where E.T. is stepping in to help. And one of my slides does say, better stop waiting on the external. E.T. didn't get the message. If he phoned home, the rescue ship didn't arrive, so we better get to bailing.
There you go. That's one of my main core messages to people is that we've got to get together, we've got to unite, we've got to come together. And it's the only way that things are going to change, unfortunately, because of the reality of the society that we live in. It's extremely difficult to get people together at this point. They're more interested in things like a football game or a golf game or something like that versus trying to make a better world for everybody.
Yep.
I think that's it by design. By design. So the website, one more time, if you would, Dr. Alexander.
It's just my name, www.johnbalexander.com. The middle initial is very important.
And that's D like Doug, right?
B Bravo.
Oh, B like boy.
Right.
Okay. John B. Alexander, ALEXANDER?
Correct.
.com.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It has been it has been one of the most interesting conversations I've had. So much of the research that you've done is so it piques everything about me. The UFOs, the remote viewing, near-death experiences, psychokinesis, meeting with shamans. You know, I read a story where the man who wrote the story believed that Jesus, when he walked the face of the earth, actually went to another country and studied the shamanism of other countries and their religions, and that is one of the reasons when he came back he understood instant manifestation and was able to do the things that he did. So that's another thing that just piques my interest. Shamans are... is it all men there? The one place that you went in Mongolia, I think you said, is it all men?
No, these are people who live there.
I see.
The shaman, in fact, the shaman that we saw there was female.
I thought a shaman was like a doctor. I misunderstand the name then.
Think of them as traditional healers or medicine men or...
and they're men though, right? You're saying it's a woman.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay. It could be either or.
See, there's 2 of the 5 that we saw there, 2 were women.
I see. So it's not always men. You see, this is the depiction, I guess, that in my mind that I've picked up from Hollywood. It always is some man.
Yeah, would not trust Hollywood.
Well, Dr. Alexander, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. We will have a link up on the site to your site as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dr. Alexander. Thank you.
See, my shorthand for conspiracy theory, which is absolutely rampant in the field.
So, as far as what you have seen and what you have experienced, with regard to, let's speak with the larger ones, the people commonly refer to flying saucers. And I know that's a great generalization within itself. But what experience have you had with those people that would be standing outside and look up and see these things that were large enough to be seen with the naked eye?
Well, I don't think that's relevant because the problem you have with personal observations, people see lots of things, and we even know that at least 95% of all sightings are just misidentification of something else. But then you have a problem with hoaxes, etc., etc. What are far more interesting to me are the ones in which you have hard data, because we have sensor systems that pick these things up all the time.
They are picked up on radar, correct?
Well, radar is one. There's satellites pick them up. There's all kinds of photos. But of course, there's a huge problem now that we have digital photography, because almost anything can be faked. But some of the earlier photos and Polaroids are really quite interesting.
Now, in your experience, when you say photos, can you elaborate a little bit? What have you seen as far as photos that you believe are authentic? What have you seen?
Well, I think McMinnville set is one. The names in California, a set of the Van Heflin photos are pretty valid. There's quite a few out there. The problem is there's probably more fakes than real ones.
Uh-huh. So in your estimation, 95% of what we're seeing is misidentification?
Well, that's not mine. That's a standard accepted figure. That's at least 95%.
Wow.
Misidentification of either things flying or astronomical phenomena, atmospheric configurations that cause it. So that's the vast majority.
What in all these things that you have, my goodness, myths, conspiracies, you've spoken to shamans, psychokinesis.
Resolved, and the priest basically passed the power to them, and we watched them do some of that.
You said something.
Themselves very badly.
You said something that caught my interest. You said they passed the power to them. Is that correct?
Correct.
When they did this, did they perform a ritual, or did they just said, "Now it's yours"? And
they were out there holding the burning branches already, kind of touching them, and he went over and kind of tapped him on the head with his elbow.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
I have not. I've been looking on the internet. I have not found anything similar or anything that approaches, what I videotaped on this trip.
That blows my mind. Let's go to the other side now. We're talking about fire. What about water? I understand that you were one of the first people to explore the unique underwater artifacts that have become known as the Bimini Wall, and many believe this to be the remnants of Atlantis. Can you tell me anything about that?
That's really, really old stuff. So on the website, that goes back 60, about 1970, somewhere around there. There's certainly interesting artifacts. Some people believe that it is beach rock. I found it quite unique. If you look at the picture, even you have posted, that is quite consistent with what we saw. And the point was, when you swam over the ocean, it looked like ocean floor, and then you hit this long, long chain of rocks, about 1,800 meters, and just all of them laid almost perfectly, like perpendicularly or parallel, and very square, very large. And I say large, I got pictures swimming alongside it where it's certainly longer than a scuba diver. We were free diving actually, but with fins and all that. So you're talking about at least 8 feet long and maybe as much wide, and very, very heavy. Certainly not things that would have been dropped there.
And dropped in a manner, I've seen pictures of this thing, dropped in a manner where it actually looks like a road.
Yeah, and like I said, the whole thing is about 1,800 meters, so it wasn't like some suggested it was.
Get a little bit of information, a little background. I've told them a little bit about how you were an Army colonel, and you went to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and that you have been studying UFOs, remote viewing, near-death experiences, psychokinesis, and that you've actually met with shamans all over the world. I just find this absolutely amazing. So let's start with UFOs. That's one of the more popular things that we talk about here.
All right.
Tell me a little bit about your UFO experience.
Be a little more specific. I mean,
well, have you actually? Have you come in contact with aliens, or is it all through documentations and pictures that you've got?
Okay. First line of the book is UFOs are real. And I mean by that physical craft that some of them transit the universe, etc. The last paragraph goes basically, and whatever this is more complex than we ever imagined. So when you say, what are UFOs? I start with, what do you mean? And specifically, we've got everything from little balls of light to reports of hard craft a mile or more across, and everything in between. And it's that variability that's a huge problem.
I totally agree. I had read an article some time ago now, it's probably about maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago, about, where was this? I think it was in Greenland, where the snow had melted unnaturally quick. I feel like 30% of the snow melted in the span of less than a month. And in the process of doing that, exposed a huge UFO that they report is 200 miles long. What was it, 200 miles long? 20 miles, I can't remember, 50 miles wide and 2 miles high. This thing is absolutely a monstrosity. Have you heard of that?
I thought the probability of that being real approaching zero.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because of the size?
No. It's because of everything you're saying. It sounds like typical folklore or CT kinds of stuff. Ballast from a ship or something like that. They'd have to have things bigger than our aircraft carriers today to have that happen.
And they're all uniformly laid out as well. I mean, so if there were ballast from a ship, they would have had to literally gone out of their way to lay them in the manner that they've been laid down. Otherwise, it would have just been dropped haphazardly.
It would have to have been a very big ship.
Yeah. Well, do you think that this has anything to do with Atlantis? Any relation?
I don't know. I've been interested in pre-cataclysmic civilizations for a long time. There's some very interesting work that is just coming out of Brazil because the Out of Africa thesis puts men, what they call Clovis men, arriving in the U.S. around 12,000 years ago, and potentially further south. But they're coming up with human findings that are 30 to 40,000 years ago. So it precludes the entire Out of Africa thesis.
Wow. I saw an article, I had actually reposted it up on my Facebook page, where some people were finding ancient artifacts here in North America, and the markings on the artifacts were very similar to the same markings that the Israelites used. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes. I mean, there are plenty of sightings. It's commonly accepted now that Norse probably made it, hundreds and hundreds of years before Columbus, and probably came in and actually started small colonies. But there are things that look like they predate that as well.
Wow.
You find the same thing, conundrum with Chinese types of things found off the west coast. So it looks like they had transoceanic sailing long before anybody thought that was possible.
Wow. Yeah, when I read that article, I was quite shocked because, what we were taught was it was the Indians and that was it. Come to find out that, again, we've been lied to. Should I be surprised? Well, let's...
I'm not sure it's lying. It's just incomplete data sets. And one of the problems we have, I think, with anthropology and archaeology is that they a standard model and then do not want to hear any data that conflicts with the established theories. That's certainly true on the
near-death experiences. What started all? What peaked all this for you?
Interesting question, and I really don't know. I've been interested in various kinds of phenomena since I was a little kid, many years ago. And what I have found is the more involved you get, the more kinds of phenomena and evidence appears out there. Again, the problem is what I call signal to noise, and that is that there's so much BS that it's, you gotta have reliable sources and multiple ways of checking things in order to understand the reliability of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no doubt the reality of many of these phenomena. I'm just back from West Africa. We're in Togo and Benin, for instance, studying voodoo. We watched people doing things with fire you simply can't do. I've done fire walking, and that is trivial compared to the kinds of things that we were observing. For instance, picking up burning logs and holding it in your mouth and flames shooting up, and not even singeing chin hair.
Wow.
Dominant. And I just don't know how you do that, taking hot coals and holding them in their mouth, and as they're exhaling, you can see the coals getting brighter and staying there for more than a minute.
Wow.
When you watch people play with fire and axe and all that, you'll notice that it's very, very fast, and you get the flames to burn away from the mouth or skin or whatnot. And
Mm-hmm.
these guys just held it on there. They stood in it. They sat in it. They did things you just can't do.
And where was this at?
That was in Togo, in West Africa.
And I take it that this is like, were these some of the shamans that you met with that were doing this?
No, I don't know if they were voodoo priests.
Uh-huh.
That's what they would call themselves. And definitely initiated. This is not something that's taken lightly, nor is it something that the general populace can do. You've got to go through extensive training courses and initiation before you're allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That said, they trotted out a couple of kids, 10 or 11 years